Have you ever wondered why it feels like your gut isn't healing? Do you feel like you've looked into everything to heal your gut, but nothing has worked? If you've been racking your brain trying to figure out what you could possibly have missed in healing your gut, then I have the perfect free webinar for you, The Gut Mold Connection: How to Heal Your Gut from the Inside Out. On Friday, January 24th, come and learn from me and mold expert Matt Kelly on why your gut isn't healing, what mold has to do with your gut, and how you can heal your gut the fastest possible from mold and other co-infections. Joining is free, but spots are limited to the first 100 attendees. To save your spot, go to betterbellytherapies.com/gut-mold to register now, or click the link in the show notes. And if you can't attend live, no worries. When you register, you automatically get signed up to receive the replay, but only if you register. So go to betterbellytherapies.com/gut-mold or click the link in the show notes and get ready to join us and learn about your gut and mold connection so you can finally heal your gut for good. Following up on the last 2 weeks' episodes, I'm continuing on with our mini-series here on air filters and toxic mold. On today's episode, I'm interviewing Edward Brahnam. Edward Brahnam is a product research and development executive at a Fortune 100 company. And for the past 6 years, he's focused on the biology, chemistry, and physics of how to remove harmful contaminants from the air in a consumer and indoor setting. Together with his wife, Lynne, they've also started their own company, Optimal Indoor Air, to apply what they've learned about healthy air quality to help those with critical indoor air quality situations, including those suffering from mold toxicity. As Edward and his wife Lynne navigated the messy and uncharted path of healing Lynne from mold, they discovered one tool that has become indispensable for them: the Hi-Tech Air Reactor. With a background in legal and a keen nose for sniffing out false claims and bad science, Lynne and her scientist-engineer husband, Edward, are breaking down the science behind and legitimacy of the Hi-Tech Air Reactor for us today. Whether you've been with us for the past 2 episodes, learning more about the Hi-Tech Air Reactor and its life-changing power against mold, or you're simply doing more research and just found us today, get ready. On today's episode, we're diving into all things science behind what I'm calling the best air filter for mold, the Hi-Tech Air Reactor. I hope you love this episode as much as I did, and that if you're a science nerd like me, the information that Edward brings today will fascinate and encourage you as you seek to better understand how to best heal from mold. Hey friend, welcome to the BetterBelly podcast. If you're currently trying endless supplements, doctor visits, and diet changes to heal your mystery symptoms, you are in the right place. We're here to solve the real root causes behind your gut, hormones, skin, sleep, and brain concerns, literally anything and everything in your body. My name is Allison Jordan. I'm a functional medicine practitioner that has supported over 150 clients just like you to heal problems that no one has been able to fix. You don't need a perfect diet or a random supplement you found on Instagram to heal. You need a proven system that heals your whole body from the inside out. That's what I'm here to share with you, episode by episode. It's time to make health easy again. And just as a reminder, this information is not meant to diagnose, manage, or treat disease. Always consult with your own health practitioner before you make any changes to your health. All right, guys, I am so excited to have onto the podcast today Edward Brahnam. He is Lynne Furtado's husband. I got connected with him because of Lynne, and you guys already met Lynne in last week's episode, but Edward brings some amazing background and knowledge to the table when it comes to talking about indoor air quality and environmental toxins. And I'm so excited for him to come on today and talk with us about all of his knowledge, but also how that applies to this new technology you guys are learning about called the Hi-Tech Air Reactor, or PCO technology, which is inside of the air reactor. So Edward, thank you so much for coming on to the BetterBelly podcast.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here.
Awesome. So let's start with the basics, Edward. I would love to know, How did you even get and started when your involvement with your company Optimize Indoor Air and the high-tech technology that you and your wife are so passionate about?
Yeah, it's a very long story, but I'll make it as far as brief as I can. Lynn talked about it some yesterday. So I'm originally an electrical engineer, got involved in product development within the health support space. And one of the things that the company that I was working with was interested in was reducing indoor pollutants. So we started doing a lot of research into the chemistry and biochemistry of starting with volatile organic compounds. And we put some like detectors all over this facility that we worked in. And it was really interesting there to watch how during different times of day, the volatile organic compounds, we'll just briefly reduce that to VOCs, how the VOCs varied from time of day. So for instance, when the cafeteria was starting to warm up for lunch, the VOCs would skyrocket for a while. When the cleaning crews were working, the VOCs would skyrocket for a while. So from there, we started looking at the difficulties involved in trying to tell one VOC from another. And the chemistry of VOCs are very similar to each other, which makes detecting them separately very difficult. For instance, I visited a place in Savannah, Georgia. There's a lot of pine forest down there, and they harvest the sap from the pine trees and they render it into turpentine, but they also make like industrial and commercial scents of all types. So for instance, a lot of the artificial lemon scents actually start off as pine sap. So obviously it's hard to tell the smell of say Lysol pine from Joy lemon because they're actually derived from the same basic chemistry to begin with. So that's the way I started getting into this professionally. And then Lynne has had a health problem path that we've been fighting with for close to 15 years actively. And it became really super critical in the past, say, 2 years when a very significant mold exposure came up in our home. And we had to go into a crash course to learn everything about how to detect where the mold is in your house, how to get rid of the mold, how to get rid of the after effects of mold having been in your house. So that's how we ended up where we are now. We were so overwhelmed by the amount of information, the amount of incorrect information that gets passed out in unmoderated forums here and there. A lot of places where speculation passes off as fact rather than real fact. So we wanted to go ahead and start a business where we could help people find the ground truth and help give them advice on how to proceed with whatever their problem may be. And yes, oh, by the way, we became very impressed by the Hi-Tech Air Reactor machines and decided to make that as a part of our business as well, that we would sell those machines as part of the business.
So you started off as just like la-di-da, I mean, maybe this isn't accurate, but like la-di-da, somebody wants to give me a salary for researching air quality, and I'm qualified because I have training and how to do these types of things. It wasn't personal. It was more just like, this is my job. Is that accurate,
Sure,
more or less?
absolutely. Yeah, I was before I came to that particular company, I was involved in a lot of Internet of Things technologies, again, doing research and product development. So, the core of much of that work was developing sensors of all different types, biological, chemical, as well as physical, mechanical, and so on. So I already had, the overall consumer electronics product development background. and then started moving that specifically into sensors that rolled very easily into strong biochemistry research.
Wow. I mean, you have like I mean, it's not the only type of technology you'd need to like really understand mold, but like that I haven't heard somebody's background is like, I just happen to know all this, who is like, it's so honed to be perfect for you to say, I don't know anything about mold, but I understand some of like the basic chemistry behind it, where that's not the case of mold sick people. We're usually starting from, I know my symptoms.
Yeah, yeah.
Or like doctors, even like, I'm more of a health practitioner for the body. I understand how the body reacts to mold and how to get mold out of it and stuff. But I mean, it's just so primed for you to be able to appreciate and even just to distinguish what's a good air quality product versus a bad one, or what are the strengths and weaknesses of them.
Oh yeah,
um
absolutely. And within the process, there's a place for several different types of air processing technologies.
yes, 100%. um we got into that a little with Lynn and a little with my episode that started all this 2 weeks ago. I want to give you a moment to talk about it, but before we get there, I actually can we just settle on the technology of PCO real quick? So PCO technology is kind of, and tell me if I'm wrong, but this is how I describe it before I let you really get into it. It's the actual technology that the high-tech air reactors are using. It is not technology that is like that they necessarily created or developed like cognitively, like they didn't theorize it, but they've applied it really well. So, Edward, I'd love for you to just bring us up to date on what PCO technology is. And PCO technology, for our new listeners, it's kind of the technology that's inside of the high-tech air reactor. It is not a technology that the high-tech company, that from my understanding, that they kind of theorized or developed, but they're applying it really well within their machine. Can you tell us, what is PCO? What does it stand for? Where else has it been used in outside of just dealing with mold? And why is high tech doing such a good job? How do they stand out as a company in applying PCO technology?
Sure. So let's start off with the acronym. PCO is photocatalytic oxidation. And to break that down into those three pieces, the type of chemical reaction that occurs when the mycotoxins or other types of air impurities are being searched out and destroyed is an oxidation reaction. And that is accompanied by or enabled by a type of a chemical called a hydroxyl radical. So the PCO technology within the air reactor uses a photocatalyst to generate the hydroxyl radicals that then destroy mycotoxins and other chemicals. Now, there's why this was chosen, why it was started. Probably about 40 years ago, NASA was taking a look at how to destroy some specific types of VOCs in space station type environments, because there, as opposed to here, you don't have gravity to help make some separation between air layers in an environment where heavier parts of the air would be at the floor, lighter parts of the air at the ceiling. So, you put your plant in a certain place and it thrives much better. So in real life outdoors, the way this is done is by a photocatalytic reaction within the atmosphere. So when that smell after a rainstorm, that real sweet smelling kind of smell, is the smell of hydroxyls in the air, and they're created naturally in nature, and they do exactly the thing in nature that we want them to do inside the home on a more large scale basis, and that is they attack pollutants of different types and they decompose them basically down to oxygen, water, hydrogen dioxide, and really friendly chemicals like those. So NASA was successful with that, and NASA has a very strong program program where they like to spin off technologies to industries. And PCO was first spun off into food processing, whereby companies that process foods, for instance, like grains that are stored in silos for a long period of time, get moldy and they have mycotoxins. And so they use PCO technology at a very large scale to help clean mycotoxins out of foods that are being processed. And then Hi-Tech picked this up and decided and thought, you know what, we could use this in a home environment to help get rid of mycotoxins. Just as an aside, before I go down there, it's been used in hospital environments and sports environments, gyms and locker rooms, for instance, places where there may be a lot of mold or other smells that make it a bit unpleasant to be around. Now, the weak part of these hydroxyls is that they are so highly reactive that they quickly react with almost anything organic and break down the surface of it, or they attach to it. Basically, if any of you want a little bit more about the chemistry, it has a negative charge. It's an oxygen atom and a hydrogen atom that are bound together. And it's really trying to either split those up and give them away to somebody who needs them, or to obtain another oxygen atom for itself and make oxygen. And so this is what happens in the atmosphere outdoor on a sunny day, all day, every day. So we looked at this chemical way of doing it. And the problem is it being so reactive is that when you put together a hydroxyl generator, then those hydroxyls will have reacted to something within 3 to 5 minutes, maybe within, say, a foot or 2 feet of the hydroxyl generator. And that's okay if you can put a containment chamber inside your machine to kill air that passes through the machine, kill things in the air that passes through. And we do that. But we also wanted to be able to go outside of the machine and search and destroy places where these mycotoxins hide and lay down when they're no longer in the air. They stick to the walls, floors, tabletops,
right?
Everywhere inside. And yeah,
Christmas tree.
Right. Everything that's soft and fuzzy. So a lot of furniture items, and so obviously none of those mycotoxins or VOCs are going to go through the machine. So we did some finance and chemical research on our own, and found out a way to stabilize chains of hydroxyls, and we've got some very interesting and positive results on actually clearing the room and knocking down contaminants on flat surfaces 10, 12 feet away from where the machine is running, within 1 hour. I don't remember the exact numbers, but maybe 50% is gone within 2 hours, maybe 75%, and then it's undetectable within 5 hours in some of the testing that we did with this kind of thing.
Right. And you've shared some documents with me that we're going to share with our listeners in the show notes. I don't know if that's the documentation you were referring to, because you guys really just have a lot of documentation. Is that's one component, and they're like, and so
we try to make it easy, even though we've got a lot of detailed scientific test reports. In some cases, like one of the pieces that I sent you simply has photographs of these Petri dishes with contaminants on them.
Yep, I have that.
And it shows, what it looked like when we started and what it looked like when we were finished. And actually, those may actually have, maybe it was a 2-week period of performance on that. But it also compared against other technologies. Air filters on their own, for instance, they do have a place because we're not doing anything within the air reactor and getting particulates out of the air, which is what most air filters are designed to do, HEPA filters in particular. But when you start thinking about VOCs, HEPA filters do nothing at all to stop or contain VOCs. The molecules are too small, and they pass right through with maybe 5% of it getting stuck as on the components as it passes through, but the rest goes back into the atmosphere. Similarly, when you even have an activated charcoal component to a filter, then the VOCs, yes, some gets trapped in the charcoal and may drop to, say, take 75% out of the air. But when you stop the airflow, it leaks back out. And it's actually within a fairly short time. So we have some charts showing that versus some of those other technologies. So I'm not trying to put those down. Like I said, they're not useless because particulate things need to be pulled out of the air as well. And that's where they excel, and they do a great job. We have in our house now 2,000 square feet. It's like 3 separate living areas. So we have 3 that are running full time, and 1 in each of the spaces. And then the other one sort of does utility duty. We move it around now and then.
Right.
As we need a little bit more work in other spaces. And then in addition to that, we have some air filters that add charcoal and HEPA filtering to the air as well to get some of the particulates out.
So, I mean, first off, I just want to say, backing up to some of what you just shared with the chemistry, thank you so much for sharing that. I actually, when I was looking and trying to research this high-tech air quality technology, it was really hard to I was like, I'm clearly not Googling the right stuff. It was hard to find anything that felt scientific and understandable and like applicable. And yet, I mean, you guys, all of our listeners just got to hear something from you that I got to hear within the first few minutes of meeting you and Lynne, which is this whole NASA thing. And it makes sense. You're like, okay, come on, if NASA's using it, it has a place. And what's really interesting too, on top of this, for our listeners' sake to understand, just like coincidence of or even just affirmation that this technology is being used in real life scenarios, is that I have my father-in-law is a food engineer. And when my husband and I were telling him about this new technology that we'd bought to clean our home's air, and they know about how me and my daughter have gotten sick from mold, and we get different symptoms, but they're very sympathetic to the issue. When we told him this, he goes, "Oh yeah, we use PCO technology and hydroxyls in the food industry all the time." I'm like, "What?" And it made sense kind of. He's like, "Yeah, we'll use it in factory." He actually talked about factories where they're processing food and like storing. He didn't give any examples, but I know that he worked for Kroger. I don't know if Kroger's using it in their manufacturing buildings, but that was his job for several decades, was improving the milk containers at Kroger or the cheese like bags, both how they function for consumers, but also how sanitary they are, how they keep the product from going bad. So he was immediately like, hydroxyls are a real thing. So even hearing you say we went from NASA being kind of forward thinking and having to deal with an issue that doesn't really exist on planet Earth, at least in the outdoors, we now realize that it's an issue indoors in a different way than, like, these environmental air toxins are an issue indoors in a way that is different than space, but still benefits from the same type of technology. And so it makes me so excited that, and it's so weird that I found it was so hard to find that information. I'm hoping now that I know more of the terms, I could go back and maybe Google stuff and get a little bit more information. But um, I mean, just really, like, this is not, even though I think people are familiar with HEPA air filters and that feels safer to them, like, oh, I understand how it works and it makes sense to my brain. It's really important that we understand that this technology is just as valid and just as useful. Um, One thing, let's see, what have we not talked about yet? Or is there anything that you want to say in response to that? I know I chatted for a hot sec there, Edward.
So yeah, I think that really wraps it up really well, and it's good that you had the background to understand what's going on there. Of course, as an independent sales representative, Lynne and I are not involved in the corporate company itself, and from one perspective, they've got a point of view that a picture's worth 1,000 words. Much more so than some big numbers in a graph to most consumers, and that's probably true. But I'm making it a focus to make sure that I extract as much hard information out of them as I can, because there are people that are going to be comforted by being able to look deeply into the science behind it.
So I'd love to know, Edward, my father-in-law, who mentioned he's familiar with the concept of hydroxyls and has used it in food engineering and food processing. One of his concerns or questions, when we're talking about the science, right, of this whole thing is that somebody might know this who's listening. Hydroxyls typically that he was familiar with need a water source to be created. And secondly, they can create a lot of other free radicals that can cause an issue for an environment. And I even told you when we brought this up, I was like, I actually don't even remember like his specific concerns, but you knew what he was talking about. Could you just talk about this for any of our listeners who might happen to be familiar with this technology of why this high-tech air reactor can accomplish sending out these, at least to your depth of your knowledge, can accomplish sending out hydroxyls without creating other harmful substances or needing a water source?
Oh, sure. Well, it does have a water source. It's the relative humidity in your home. And mold people, most of them, watch and control their relative humidity very well. And so we have humidifiers in the house as well. And we try to keep the indoor humidity 45, 50%. And so the hydroxyl generation within the AirTech works really well if you do have an indoor humidity at about that level. So of course, in the winter, we have to run more humidifiers, except when it's a rainy day, to make sure that we have the humidity up so that there's enough water in the air for the high-techs to actually generate the hydroxyls. Now, this is another part of the PCO acronym. So we talked about the oxidation part of that. The photo is the source of energy from the light that makes the reaction happen, and the chemical part of it, or excuse me, I'm sorry, the catalyst part of it. A catalyst in chemistry is something that accelerates a reaction like 1,000 times faster, generates 1,000 times more of whatever, but it's not actually consumed in the process. So it does not become released into the atmosphere. A second point in here that often comes up is, well, you've got UV lights in there generating ozone, but actually the particular wavelength of ultraviolet that we use is something that destroys ozone. So the ozone in your air that may come into the machine, we may strip an extra oxygen atom off of that to help create the hydroxyls as well. Now, we focus on the OH hydroxyl itself without any other long chain chemistry involved. Titanium dioxide is part of what we use there, and that's the dioxide part of that. Of course, that's oxygen. The titanium part of it is expensive jewelry. So even if it were to become part of some chemical coming out, it's unlikely that it would be harmful in any way. Now, I won't necessarily go into it here, but within some of the documentation that I provided you, I'm going to break it out into a standalone one-pager. But the reactions are very simple. When you take a look at the mycotoxins, then they are pretty much hydrocarbons only. You might have a little bit of nitrogen in one of them, but it's at very, 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 very low levels. So yeah, there might be some extra nitrogen gas that comes out if you have a particular mycotoxin or whatever. There is an interim state of the decomposition or the oxidation reaction where the hydroxyls attack biologicals. And it's one of the first byproducts is a type of acid that's in the air but it's for a very short time, because then, as I pointed out, it decomposes into oxygen, water, hydrogen dioxide, hydrogen dioxide, and those types of chemicals.
All right. And I'm just gonna have to believe you on this. We actually did talk about maybe we should like throw my father-in-law on the like some future episode and let people talk chemistry.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because I'm sure he knows the chemistry of this a whole lot more in depth than I do. I'm an electrical engineer, and I've learned chemistry secondhand from a lot of really smart PhD chemists over the years. Yeah, I did take some in college, but in high school. But yeah, I've learned the rest of it secondhand through associating with other people that are doing the real hard work in this space.
And I think that there's a lot of things that get covered by at least the quantity of subjective testimonials people have from Hi-Tech helping them, including you and Lynne experiencing it, or Lynne in particular, but you watching her improve because of that. I mean, there's a lot of things that can be covered with our ignorance by simply watching it happen. But speaking of that, I'd like to take a quick detour away from science. We'll actually go back to it a little towards the end, or at least some more practicals on how to use high-tech technology in the overall mold remediation process. But I'd love to make this personal for a hot sec and have you describe just your, as Lynne's husband, and she talked about in last week's episode, her health decline and what that looked like, what that felt like on her end. As her husband and as an indoor air quality expert engineer, could you tell us what it was like from your perspective to see her health decline? I'd be interested in you just talking us through things like, was it immediately obvious to you that mold was behind it? Or with your background in understanding air quality and environmental toxin issues, were you surprised by the severity and range of symptoms she was getting? I just love to hear, like, emotionally or logically, what was it like for you to watch your wife go through this and kind of come to grips that mold was causing it?
Yeah, this started like 15 years ago, before I was really into any type of air quality work at all. And we had no idea that mold was involved at that particular point in time. There were an environmental exposure was really serious and significant. That was a big part of kicking this off. And there was a lot of false diagnoses from the medical community, misdiagnoses from allergists and primary care and internal medicine and other types of specialists that we went to. And so after we ended up abandoning a house and moved to a different place, and as we didn't know the extent and types of cross-contamination that could occur, we ended up taking, some of the furniture and clothing and bedclothes and sheets with us, and contaminated that environment as well. And then we lost a car, and Lynne had to move into an apartment. And and at that point in time, it's starting to become, extremely frustrating, feeling powerless, and what can we do next? And she lived in gloves and masks, and washing everything with ammonia or other types of things to try and make sure that things were not contaminated, and learning how to wash clothing to get contaminants out. At that point in time, we're still not thinking mold too much.
Wow.
And so when this finally got super critical about 2 years ago, and at that point in time, and of course, through the whole time, it's heartbreaking and it's demoralizing, and try to give as much support as I can. But it's when she's in pain and having neurological systems, not just a little bit of pain too, debilitating pain. During this time period, she was actually in pain management clinics for about 5 years, and went through and came out of that. And during the phase before the the mold became hypercritical here, she started doing all kinds of secondary alternative things and started experimenting with some types of microdosing and some types of hemp-based products to help control pain and reduce sensitivity. And I'm sure she talked about other symptomology as well, with being unable to sleep and so on. I wasn't able to listen to her yesterday. Then we came to a point within a home that we had bought that was new to us, that we found that the builder had caused a problem in the bathroom within the main suite, and that there was mold in there. And Lynne in particular is an incredible researcher into the kinds of things that create the symptom syndromes that she has. And so she started saying, oh my goodness, we've got mold there. We've got to do something about the mold. And we decided at that point in time, when we started saying, oh my goodness, mold isn't just, wipe it down with Clorox and it goes away for a couple of months. And then you wipe it down again when it comes back. That's not what you do. But we did find a DO who has gone into alternative therapies, who ran her through, amongst other testing, the OAT test, the organic acids test, and found out that her body is colonized with 2 types of mold, as well as a Lyme co-infection and some heavy metals, and also had a Clostridia overgrowth. And the Clostridia, oh yeah,
and they all come together. I just want to interrupt and be like, it's so, whenever someone's like, I just have a C. diff infection, I'm like, I'm sorry. That just, it can happen. If you're chronically ill though, that's not I've never seen it be just C. diff or just mold. It's so, and I actually sometimes say from the health perspective, that usually if there's one issue, the body is strong enough and resilient enough, it can kind of overcome it. She could have had that Lyme for years and it was in remission, but we know that Lyme will come out of remission or come out of our cells and become active, just like a viral load, if you are having a suppressed immune system. And so it makes sense that from a health perspective, hearing her story, yeah, she suddenly is not going to have when she gets really good testing, she's not going to have just one issue. And so I'm really glad that you guys were able to find that. And that's what we help our clients do on our end, at least inside the body. But she clearly found that, and you guys were onto something then. So this is great. You in the story now, you have Lynne has through symptomology research kind of identified maybe it's mold. You now found a practitioner to look at her body. There's still in the background this home issue of there's some suspected issues of mold in the bathroom, but it's not dealt with yet. But you're now this is the optimal point, right? When someone's healing, in my mind, it's okay, we're finally getting closer to the answer. What happens next for you guys?
Yeah, I agree with you. We're at a point finally to start taking some different paths proactively against these things. The Clostridia went away really fast with standard antibiotic or antifungal type treatment, and it changed her gut health quite a bit, very quickly. We also got in touch with it's another syndrome that she has, a thing called interstitial cystitis, which is a bladder problem. But we found that a lot of her burning and itching and so on might be helped with a type of medication called a mast cell inhibitor, rather than focusing on the antihistamine, focusing on the stuff that creates the antihistamines. Urologist and gynecologist that takes care of the mast cell, which is actually a treatment for interstitial cystitis as well. But yeah, then we started working on.
Okay, we got cut off a little bit, Edward. And so sorry, listeners, we're having some connectivity issues. But I want to be able to catch as much as we can from this. Edward, can you bring us back a little bit to it? I mean, it clearly what was going on, and I really value this that you're talking about Lynne's whole health situation. It was never just about one thing. It wasn't just about remediating from mold or getting Hi-Tech Air Reactor, or cleaning your clothes right. Clearly you're starting to make progress, and it's very common when you're mold ill that, again, it's this multi-layer issue and everyone's layers are different or how you address them. But can you just bring it back to, and I'm really interested in this because this question, which is how how believable was it for you that mold was creating her problem? And I kind of asked that because it is a very common dynamic. First off, you weren't sick that I can tell. You haven't mentioned noticing any symptoms on your end, and it's so common that at least one person in a family, the families that I'm working with, is not impacted by mold or very, very minimally, to the point that they're like, so what? I have this extremely small symptom that happens every now and again. Um, and unfortunately, often this person is the husband who's not being impacted, or the father, if it's children being impacted. I'd just love, like, I know you're a little different because you have that background in indoor air quality, and so maybe it was different for you, but was there any part of you that had a disbelief, or like, is it really mold, or was it like, no, this makes so much sense when you heard that?
No, when I first heard that, then it was, oh my God, I got to look into this and see what's really going on here, because I hadn't
Mm,
ever really heard a whole lot about mold sickness. And Lynne, she, like I was saying earlier, she's an incredible researcher on this, and she would feed me stuff that you would find everywhere, and ask me, "What do you think about this? Could this be part of it?" And then we got a couple of books on the topic and researched into it, and it all started matching up. And so I went from, oh my God, this is something we've got to really look into to find out how much this could be part of your health problem, to, basically, I'd say within, a couple of weeks of starting to really dig into it, of, yeah, you know what? This is probably the root of a whole lot of her problems. And it has probably been something that's been affecting her since she was very, very young. And the Bartonella in particular can be passed on from mother to child. So that could have been in utero. And she knows that she lived in a moldy house when she was a very young child. So, lucky enough being young and strong, it didn't affect her too badly. She had all kinds of things that she dealt with all of her life. But becoming older and having several other health issues come along that helped to compromise her immune system and to physically weaken her, it just ended up being a perfect storm at that point.
yeah. Yeah. This is interesting to hear even the timeline that you said, several weeks being fed the information. And I find that when I first started, even as a health practitioner, it was somewhere between obvious and not a big deal to me to accept that parasites could be the hidden cause behind someone's GI issues, everything from IBS to constipation to bloating, or H. pylori, all these things. And when it came to mold, I remember being like, I don't really want to deal with this. For a couple years, I was like, I would literally tell clients, I work with everything but Lyme and mold. And just through, I think, enough exposure to clients where it'd be like, okay, we did all the normal stuff. We did the song and dance with the parasite or the H. pylori or the stomach acid or the liver detox. And you made some improvements, but you plateaued. I was faced that I had to think about mold and I had to think about Lyme. And I initially outsourced it, where I'd kind of be like, go and work with this other person who's an expert in it. But I was forced to be really considerate, and not just on a believability factor, but exactly how does this work? And I find that I'm a little sad that I didn't document that journey because I wasn't sure if I was going to get to the end of the journey and be like, never touch it again. So, but it's interesting that, yeah, just she showed you everything. And did it make sense? Like, do you remember coming across any documentation or articles that you're like, that doesn't quite like line up scientifically, but then there was just like enough that did that that it made sense? Or was it pretty much all overwhelmingly like, actually that lines up with your understanding on how chemistry or biology or et cetera works? What was that like?
Oh no, it's definitely a winnowing out process because there sad to say there are a lot of unethical people in this world, and they make all kinds of promises. If you buy my thing, you'll get your life back,
Yeah.
and they often misrepresent and spin um, the truth in a way that when people talk about many liars, the best lies is like 93% truth with 7% of your misdirection thrown in, just enough to draw people away from the focus of core truth.
Yeah. So it sounds like some of the stuff you found, maybe even leaning on the solution side, not so much is mold the problem or how could it be the problem, but maybe things you guys were finding about like this will solve your bodily symptoms, or was that kind of more where the where the things got sticky?
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And and some things, um, it's almost one of those one size fits all problems because there are a lot of tools out there that may help for a while you need to go through them to figure out how much of it you need. So, for instance, at one point in time, when Lynne's interstitial cystitis was very bad, there's a very strong dietary component in that with acidic foods and other spicy foods, peppery things and all that. So we went through this elimination diet and cut out almost everything all the way down to an incredibly basic diet and slowly start adding things back in to find out what your problems are. And surprisingly, eggs ended up being one of her problems as well. And also surprisingly, if the egg is cooked within a baking process in a cake or a brownie or something like that, it does not cause the problems that just a boiled egg might cause for her. So we had to go through that. We went through another activity that was related to that called the autoimmune protocol, and there were a lot of good things involved in AIP, but that none of that was a total solution for everything that she was going through. It helped get some of the symptomology under control. Her interstitial cystitis is well controlled most of the time through both diet and some medication. Her itching and burning all over her body from the inside is livable for her most of the time. She can cope with that, but we can end up someplace where some type of environmental contaminant just sets her off, and she'll be, next to bedridden for 3 days, simply because she got hit so bad by a contaminant. That happened. We went to a church last week, and they were having a pageant inside, and they had a fog machine going, and they had some kind of fake snow coming from the ceiling, and she was out of it for 3 days after that. And we have no idea what was in that, but we know that we can't go to that type of production ever again.
Right. And this is unique to Lynne or someone who has her, it's not all mold. It's not all mold illness,
sure,
but
absolutely.
It can be common that people who are prone to mold illness are also now prone to being sensitive to other chemicals and contaminants that are airborne or otherwise. So it can also be a common story while it's not necessarily the same story everyone's going to have. Well, to wrap, go ahead.
Yeah, and there's other crossovers. So let me just say one thing. I know you got to say something, but let's sneak this in. One other thing. And that, I think, crosses over into a lot of the neurological problems that are caused both by mold and Lyme and Lyme secondaries. And there's probably a whole lot of PTSD within these people that have multiple disease syndromes and multiple um, multiple syndromes on their
Yeah.
symptomology.
It makes it all super hard to sift through. You have to be patient. You have to both as the one trying to heal and anyone that they try to work with to heal them. You have to be a good listener. You have to just be willing to try things out, work hard. And you're kind of motivated because you want your body to be as functional as possible, while also just having to slog through it. Well, what I wanted to do to wrap up with this section is just to say, because the last thing we're going to talk about here is how high-tech air filter can or air reactor can fit into the overall mold remediation process, and have you share about this tool that you and your wife have created that you have so generously are gifting or sharing with our listeners. But just to wrap up this whole kind of your experiences being her husband, of being a engineer and basically a phenomenal researcher and essentially scientist about this whole process with her health, if you could give advice to any husbands or family members who are struggling to believe or understand that their wives or children or other family or friend members are currently going through mold related symptoms, like if they're just struggling to believe it or understand, how would you encourage these people, or what's something you would want to say to them?
I would say this. So the document that I gave you that you're alluding to, I've got to do a version 2 of that, but it focuses on 3 core things for mold remediation in your house. Number 1, you have to stop the water leaks. Number 2, you have to physically remove all of the active mold. And number 3, you have to do a strong cleanup of all of the residual, fragments of mold that are in your home, mold spores that are in your home, mycotoxins that are in your home. That's the core of a typical recommendation that you'll get from a remediation company. And of course, all this is done under negative air pressure containment to try and stop cross-contamination and so on. But what I would add to that is, if you are in a place where you are having much of the symptomology that is related to what's typically outlined as mold sickness, with mycotoxins, that can include a lot of respiratory things. It can include a lot of other allergic things. Like I said, Lynne is affected by itching and burning all over her body, and also the neurological symptoms. So there can be body tremors, there can be loss of coordination, there can be almost bipolar ups and downs in your affect and your emotions. If you're experiencing those kinds of things and you even suspect that you have mold, and you haven't even started on trying to figure out what kind of mold you have in your house and where it is, I would encourage you to go ahead and start with the high-tech air reactors at that point, to knock down the mycotoxins and any other VOCs that might be contributing to your symptomology. What I'll say about these machines is that they are physically very simple and they're incredibly easy to clean. They're made out of stainless steel. There are some disposable things in there. I think I mentioned the titanium dioxide, but point being is that they can stay in your house up to the point where you start remediation process. They can stay in your house during the remediation, and you can keep them in your house after remediation as well. But like I said, there are going to be some things that you replace, and it's things that are replaced during normal maintenance anyway, on a 6-month basis or an annual basis. And they're easy to reach, easy to get to, and easy to replace those items And like I said, very easy to go ahead and do a physical cleaning of the machine while you're doing that routine maintenance as well. We even take one of the machines with us whenever we travel, because we have no idea what's going to be in a hotel room or the room of a family member or friend that we're staying with. So we keep those with us, and they can also be used to within your vehicle to keep it cleaned out as well.
Yeah, yeah. Lynn mentioned that you guys saved a vehicle using Hi-Tech Air Reactor to help essentially clean it out, which is awesome.
Yeah, we did.
So I love that. If anyone who's listening, if you guys want this remediation packet, it's a free gift from Edward and Lynn. You're going to go to betterbellytherapies.com/remediation, and you can get this document. When I saw it, it might be in version 2.0. It might be a little different, but the original format, which is super simple but amazing. It was 4 pages, really dense information. You guys used it not only to guide yourselves in your own steps. You wanted to basically check off boxes and be able to say, like, we did each step, but guide any company that you hired and make sure that they were going to, have the same level of expectations. You guys even had some companies, Lynn told us this, that you had some companies that were like, nope, these are too high of expectations. And you're like, good, we want to weed out the bad ones, right? And
Yeah, we do.
I,
He was willing to adapt his company protocols to the way that we wanted him to work, and he actually even allowed me to get into the hazmat suit and work with him through it.
I love it. So again, just an amazing document that again I've actually seen more resources being developed around guidance around getting good inspection around mold, which we've gotten and I've seen primarily from resources like Yes, We Inspect, which we had on our podcast. It'd be episode. Ooh, I don't have it in front of me. I will have the episode in the show notes. But the co-founder Brian Carr came on and talked about the 5 signs of hidden mold in your home, and he gave us a lot of inspection documents. But this remediation document, I have not seen anything quite like it. I mean, it's just a huge gift, and I would love Edward to round us out. Um, I guess for our listeners, I'll let them know that, Lynn she's your other half and she is the person who is your direct contact method. So if anybody has questions or wants to know if Hi-Tech's right for them or how to size it for their home, needs support for things, anything like that, in the show notes, we're going to be putting Lynn's phone number and email, which she has explicitly said is how anyone can call her, email her. It's not always normal for podcasts, but that is how you can get in contact with Lynn, and via Lynn, Edward. Hopefully you don't get too many questions, Edward. But that being said, to just wrap us up on this conversation, we've covered so much. Thank you again just for everything you've shared today. But if you could give advice to any husbands or family members out there who currently are not mold sick, but they have a spouse, children, family members, friends who are going through, or at least telling the person without symptoms that they're going through mold related illness, how could you what encouragement could you give them as someone who you yourself has had very little, if any, symptoms from mold or environmental toxins?
Yeah, I would start with 2 things, and number one is patience. Number 2 is going to be, you may have to alter your methods and modes of communication, because there are quite a bit of potential side effects and symptomology that affects cognition, communication, and it is real. The point I think that is maybe most important underlying all that is to believe and support. And it's going to be a difficult journey in many, many ways. physically, emotionally, spiritually, financially, physically, almost in every, socially as well. You know, you end up in many cases isolated from friends and family members.
You can't go to the pageant at the church with the fog machine.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Or something similar, depending on your sensitivity.
And really, you know, I hate to say it, but probably can't go to that church at all anymore just because, you know.
Right. Yeah.
So, you know, not because I hate people there, but it's just I can't deal with the physical reactions from some of the contaminants that are there. You know, it's like any sick building. You know, and sick building syndrome is a thing too.
And that's actually, I find the research, if that term, sick building syndrome or environment, like sick buildings, mold sick buildings, water damaged buildings, those have been easier for me to find research on in terms of just like, it's, I don't know why, it's just been easier for me to find hard stuff, but that's just a distraction for now. I love, thank you so much, Edward, for those thoughts. You know, patience, sounds like you didn't quite say it this way, but you said alter your methods and modes of communication, maybe just even giving them grace that maybe they're not going to communicate the best or as high of a level as you think they should or ought to. And then just
or used to.
Or right. Cause Lynne, she's a smart cookie. Her kind of history and places she's worked, it's clear that she is and was a powerhouse, but mold has impact. It especially did in the past, but probably continues to a little bit impact that. And so, thank you, Edward, so much just for, honestly, can I just say, being who you are? Who knew that you didn't know you were going to get into all this maybe 20 years ago, but just being a scientist, a researcher, someone with a lot of compassion and heart, and sharing that now with our audience and listeners. It's been such an honor to have you on the podcast.
Oh, I appreciate it, Allison. Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk with you again. It's always really enjoyable and informative.
Hey friend, I hope you loved this episode. If you've been a fan for a while or newly loving this podcast, can you do me a favor? Drop into Apple Podcasts and leave me a review. When you leave a review, you do so much. You help me know you're listening, you can tell me what you're loving so I know what to make more of, and you help others by boosting this podcast so other people like you can find the podcast too. I mean, it's a win-win-win, right? So if you want a way to pay it forward, just go to Apple Podcasts or click the link in my show notes and leave a rating and review. And if you want some more free stuff, just head over to my free Facebook group, betterbellytherapies.com/Facebook, and you can get access to all of my free support for you, including some Facebook group exclusive stuff like my podcast episode vault, where you can search the BetterBelly podcast by topic and find exactly what you need to expedite your healing. I cannot wait to see you in there. Catch you guys next week.